The first thing the audience noticed wasn't the music. It was the face. Under the blazing stage lights of America's Got Talent, the cameras zoomed in on a Filipino contestant standing nervously at center stage. The crowd had been buzzing moments earlier, but now a ripple of confusion passed through the theater like a sudden gust of wind. Whispers turned into gasps. The man looked exactly like Simon Cowell. Not just similar. Not just. Kind of. It was uncanny. The sharp jawline, the familiar smirk, the slightly raised eyebrow that suggested equal parts skepticism and amusement. Even the way he stood, one hand casually resting at his side, felt eerily familiar. Simon blinked, then blinked again. The audience camera cut to him, and for once, the famously unshakable judge appeared genuinely stunned. "Is this some kind of prank?" Simon muttered into his microphone. The contestant smiled nervously. "Good evening, Sir Simon," he said in a soft Filipino accent. "I promise, I am not your long-lost twin." The audience erupted into laughter and applause. Backstage, producers scrambled. Social media monitors lit up like fireworks. Within seconds, clips were being recorded, captions drafted in real time. Simon meets his doppelgänger. This is unreal. But no one, not the judges, not the audience, not even the contestant himself, knew that the night was about to become far more than a viral moment. His name was Rafael de la Cruz. He was 32 years old, from Cebu City in the Philippines. He grew up in a small coastal barangay where karaoke nights were as common as sunset prayers. His father was a fisherman. His mother worked long hours at a tailoring shop. They didn't have much, but they had music. As a child, Rafael would stand in front of a cracked mirror nailed to a wooden wall and pretend he was on a grand stage. Sometimes he sang power ballads. Sometimes he imitated talent show judges with exaggerated expressions, making his younger siblings laugh. When he was 16, a neighbor pointed out something strange. "You look like that British judge," she said, pointing at the television screen during a replay of an old audition clip. Rafael laughed it off. But over time, the resemblance grew more obvious. As he aged into his 30s, his features sharpened. Strangers started asking for selfies. Tourists visiting Cebu would stop him in malls. "Simon," they would whisper hesitantly. At first, it annoyed him. Then it amused him. Eventually, it became something he couldn't ignore. Still, Rafael didn't dream of fame because of his face. He dreamed of it because of his voice. Music was his escape from reality. When typhoons tore through his province, when money ran thin, when his father's boat needed repairs they couldn't afford, Rafael sang. He sang at weddings, at school events, at small fiestas. His voice wasn't flashy, it was warm, textured, and honest. But opportunities in Cebu were limited. When his best friend Marco jokingly suggested, "Why don't you audition for that American show?" "Imagine Simon's face when he sees you," Rafael laughed for a full minute. Then he stopped laughing. The idea planted itself quietly in his mind. Months later, after saving every spare peso from gigs and borrowing money from relatives who believed in him more than he believed in himself, Rafael found himself standing in line for an international audition tour linked to America's Got Talent. He didn't tell many people. He didn't want the pressure. But the moment he walked onto that stage and locked eyes with Simon, something shifted inside him. It wasn't fear, it was destiny. Back in the theater, the crowd was still buzzing as Simon leaned forward. "This is honestly the strangest thing that's happened to me in years," Simon said slowly. "Are you absolutely sure we're not related?" Rafael chuckled. "My mother would have mentioned it, sir." The other judges were laughing now, wiping tears from their eyes. One of them leaned over and whispered loudly, "This is like looking into a time travel mirror." But Simon raised a hand. "All right, the face is unsettling," he admitted. "But we're not judging a lookalike contest. What are you going to do for us tonight?" Rafael took a breath. "I'm going to sing," he said. "And I hope, for once, you'll be speechless." The orchestra cue began softly. It wasn't a flashy pop song. It was a stripped-down rendition of a classic ballad, the kind that builds slowly, demanding emotional honesty more than vocal acrobatics. The first note left Rafael's lips gently. The laughter in the room dissolved instantly. His voice carried warmth, like sunlight filtering through a cloudy afternoon. It wasn't just technically good. It felt lived in. Every word carried the weight of years of small-town struggles, quiet resilience, and unspoken dreams. The camera cut to Simon. His expression had changed. The amused skepticism was gone. In its place was something rare, attention. As the song swelled, Rafael's confidence grew. He wasn't thinking about looking like Simon anymore. He wasn't thinking about cameras or viral clips. He was back in Cebu. Back in front of that cracked mirror. Back in the small living room where his siblings clapped offbeat while his mother smiled from the doorway. The final chorus hit like a wave. His voice rose, not with arrogance, but with hope. And when the last note hung in the air, trembling slightly before fading into silence, something extraordinary happened. The theater didn't erupt immediately. It paused, that sacred half-second where thousands of people collectively hold their breath. Then the room exploded, a standing ovation. People weren't cheering because he looked like Simon. They were cheering because he didn't. Rafael stood frozen as confetti cannons misfired prematurely backstage in the chaos. He glanced at Simon. The judge hadn't moved. He was still seated, still staring, speechless. For a man known worldwide for sharp critiques and blunt honesty, silence was powerful. Finally, Simon leaned into his microphone. "This," he began slowly, "is extremely strange for me." The audience laughed again, but Simon didn't smile. "When you walked out here, I thought this was going to be a gimmick. A joke. A 5-minute viral moment." He paused. "But then you sang." Rafael swallowed. "And for the first time in a very long time," Simon continued, "I forgot what you looked like." The crowd roared again. Simon stood up. "I don't know whether to be impressed or slightly concerned that my mirror image has more talent than me." The judges voted unanimously. 4 yeses. Backstage, Rafael collapsed into Marco's arms, who had secretly flown in to surprise him. "You made him speechless," Marco shouted. "Do you realize how impossible that is?" Rafael laughed through tears. But the story didn't end there. Within hours, clips of the audition flooded social media. Hashtags trended globally. Memes circulated comparing side-by-side photos of Rafael and Simon. News outlets across Asia picked up the story. Headlines read, "Filipino singer shocks AGT, and Simon himself." Back in Cebu, Rafael's parents gathered neighbors around a small television to replay the performance again and again. His father, usually stoic, wiped his eyes discreetly. "That's my son," he murmured. As the competition progressed, Rafael faced a new challenge. Expectations. The novelty of his appearance began to fade. Producers worried the audience would grow tired of the mirror image angle. Critics online debated whether he was advancing because of talent or resemblance. Rafael felt the pressure. During rehearsals for the next round, he struggled. His voice cracked once, then twice. Simon noticed. After a particularly tense run-through, Simon approached him privately. "You know," Simon said quietly, "if you rely on looking like me, you'll fail." Rafael nodded. "I don't want to be you," he replied softly. "I want to be me." Simon studied him carefully. "Good answer." For the semifinals, Rafael chose a song in Filipino, a bold move on an American stage. Some advisors warned him against it. "People won't understand the lyrics," they said. But Rafael shook his head. "They'll understand the feeling." The night of the performance, he closed his eyes before stepping out. He wasn't Simon's mirror. He was Cebu's voice. The melody began with traditional Filipino instrumentation blended into a modern arrangement. The unfamiliar language filled the theater, but emotion transcended translation. By the second verse, audience members were crying. By the final chorus, they were on their feet again. When the camera found Simon, something had changed permanently. He wasn't just impressed, he was proud. After the performance, Simon didn't joke about resemblance. Instead, he said, "You came here as my mirror image. But tonight, you became something far more interesting, your own reflection." The line went viral. Rafael advanced to the finals. On finale night, he stood on stage one last time. He thought about his father's boat, his mother's sewing machine, the cracked mirror. He thought about the whispers, the laughter, the disbelief. Then he sang, not to prove anything, not to shock Simon, but to honor the journey. When the results were announced, the tension in the theater felt electric. Rafael didn't win first place. He came second, but as confetti rained down around the champion, something unexpected happened. The crowd began chanting his name. Rafael, Rafal. Simon walked over and pulled him into a brief, awkward hug, something the audience knew was rare. "You didn't need to win," Simon said quietly. "You already did." Months later, Rafael returned to Cebu, not as a doppelgänger, but as a symbol. Local schools invited him to speak. Young singers lined up for advice. Tourists still asked for selfies, sometimes jokingly calling him Simon. But now he smiled differently. "Not Simon," he would say gently. "Just Rafael." He used part of his prize money and sponsorship earnings to fund music workshops for underprivileged children in his province. He wanted them to have more than a cracked mirror. Back in Los Angeles, Simon watched a video clip of one of Rafael's workshops. Dozens of children singing together in a modest community hall. He shook his head with a small smile. "Unbelievable," he muttered, "because sometimes, the most powerful reflections aren't about appearance. They're about impact." Years later, whenever people asked Simon about the strangest moment in his career, he didn't mention outrageous auditions or dramatic eliminations. He mentioned the night he looked on stage and saw himself, and then heard something entirely different. He described the confusion, the laughter, the silence, and the voice that made him forget his own face. "Mirror image," he would say thoughtfully. "No, that was the night I realized even a reflection can surprise you." And somewhere in Cebu, a once nervous singer would smile at the memory, not because he had left Simon speechless, but because he had finally found his own voice beyond the mirror.